The award-winning crossover segment is off and running. Mike, we've got so much that we could get to here. We only have 2 topics apiece that we will tee up to each other. And I think I might have some editing to do. So I'm going to make my decisions based on what you ask me. So I'm going to let you start so that I can
Okay, I'm
going
to start by something I wrote earlier in the week in the Orlando Sentinel. You can still read that, by the way, at orlandosentinel.com. Cheap plug. All right. And it was about Jamahl Mosley. Obviously, he got the 4-year contract extension with the Magic. Well-deserved, obviously. But I'm getting tired of people calling him a player's coach. I think that minimizes his ability as a tactician. I don't think he gets enough ability for being a strategist. Do you think Jamahl Mosley gets enough ability or gets enough credit for being a tactician? And do you think players coach is a minimizing type of reference?
I think players coach used to be a degrading term that we would throw towards coaches that got along with players, and sometimes they had good teams, but it was only if the players liked that coach. And usually what it meant when we said that was you get walked all over, whether your team's good or bad. If you're a player's coach, you don't actually have respect in the locker room. I think the idea of a player's coach has changed over the last couple of years, because in today's world, whether you like it or not, you kind of have to be a player's coach unless you are one of the older legends in the game. Like Greg Popovich can get away with it still because he's got a trophy case. Bill Belichick, even he felt like he wasn't getting away with it at the end. Nick Saban could get away with it. Outside of those guys, the new age coaches in every sport that seem to succeed are players coaches. So I think the terminology is the same, but the meaning behind it is different. Being a player's coach is relating to your players and still being able to motivate and inspire them without being a strict disciplinarian.
I'm not saying that you don't have. I'm not saying that you can't have that as part of your repertoire, players coach. All right, but I think when that's how people tag you, I think there's some racial connotations as well, because it's usually black coaches that are being called players coaches, especially in the NBA. So it bothers me a little bit. That's all I'm saying.
He doesn't get a ton of credit for being a tactician because he gets so much credit for being a player development guy. And a player development guy is sort of the new age way of explaining players coach. I think what you're saying applied not even that long ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the way that we would describe a player's coach. I think you're right. There probably was some racial connotation to that. I don't think that exists anymore. I think we're beyond that, where a player's coach now is a compliment. That means you're doing it right. And what he does best is develop players. Probably doesn't get enough credit for being a tactician, but I also don't think that's his specialty. He's good at it, but that's not what I would say is his calling card is, Jamahl Mosley out of a timeout is elite. No, he's elite at every player on the team, Mike, is better right now than they were a year ago. And he's increased their win total year over year. He's a player development guy, and that's a player's coach. Okay. All right, let's talk NFL free agency. I think it's pretty obvious that the Bucs did well based on what their plan was, which was status quo. Let's stay the same. Let's keep our guys, Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans. So they're good. The Dolphins lost pieces left and right. They lost a starter every hour of the first 4 hours of free agency. So I can't call their free agency a win. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm a little bit more on the fence with. Would you say that the Jags won or lost NFL free agency? Calvin Ridley's now a Titan. Gabe Davis is now his replacement, apparently. They did keep Josh Allen in the mix. You know, I know you're on in Jacksonville these days. So
yeah, they got. I think they got a really, and again, I know center doesn't exactly.
Mitch Morris. Oh, it's a big move.
Yeah, I think they got a good sitter in Mitch Morris, and maybe I'm being a Central Florida homer here. All right, but I don't think Gabe Davis is that big of a downgrade from Calvin Ridley, especially when you look at what they got him for. Calvin Ridley's good, don't get me wrong, but he's not $92 million, $50 million guaranteed good. All right. And that's what the Titans had to pay him to get him out of Jacksonville. I don't think the Jaguars were willing to pay that much, and I give them credit for that. I think that's the sign of a organization that's showing some restraint. I think good organizations show restraint, and they don't overpay for guys who are good but not great.
Yeah, I think Gabe Davis is a pretty considerable downgrade from Calvin Ridley, but I do agree with your point. Calvin Ridley got overpaid by the Tennessee Titans, so if that was the tag, if that's what you had to pay him to keep him, that's probably not the best move. But I think the Jags have to do something. Who's the number one receiver for Trevor Lawrence? We're waiting for this guy to turn into the star that we were all promised he would be. Who's his number one guy? Evan Ingram, Zay Jones? Gabe Davis is not a number one wide receiver.
Gabe
Love
Davis,
Gabe, but he's
given
not.
the opportunity, can be a number one receiver. He didn't get targets in Buffalo last
His quarterback
year.
was Josh Allen. Like,
Okay.
if you can't be a star with that guy as your quarterback, it's not going to happen.
Well, when he's not throwing you the football, what did he have, like 3 targets a game last year? That was what he averaged.
You earn targets, Mike. You earn targets with your separation.
Okay. All right. Obviously, a lot of talk about golf. It's golf season. We had the Arnie last week here in Orlando. Now you've got the Players Championship going on up in Ponte Vedra Beach. Rory McIlroy running his mouth again, talking at the Arnie. He said that the PGA Tour needs to be more exclusive, needs to be smaller. This past week, before the Players Championship, he said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said essentially that the PGA Tour and Live Golf need to get this feud settled because golf is suffering as a result. I think Rory McIlroy is setting the stage to jump to Live. He's softened his stance on Live. He's been more welcoming of that tour. He says he wants the PGA Tour to be more exclusive. He's moaning and bickering about the PGA Tour. I think Rory McIlroy's fed up, and he's voicing his concerns as sort of greasing the skids to Live.
Ugh, disgusting. There are 2 guys the PGA Tour can't afford to lose. Rory is the face of golf. Can't afford to lose him. Huge blow to the brand. Scotty Scheffler, best golfer in the world. As long as Scotty Scheffler is on your tour is the biggest deal. If either one of those guys, and certainly if both of them, were to leave to go to Live, that would tilt the scales. Then all you would need is whatever TV deal they got to come up with. Live could gain a lot of momentum with those 2 guys, and it's really going to come down to their own morals, values, and what's on their priority list. Is it to be front and center on the tour that's existed and has legacy in this country forever and ever? Or is it to stick it to the golf world that's been holding the man down over all of these years? I hope that that's not the case, because the Live Tour has shown us that all they're really doing is throwing money at great players and then producing a whole lot of nothing. Can you tell me your favorite Live moment so far?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, when the Live Tour came to Orlando last year, and I went out and covered the tournament, and I actually had a good time covering it, but I haven't watched Live since. So other than actually personally being at a tournament, no. I
like watching golf. I don't think I've watched a minute of Live Golf. And you know what I noticed over this past weekend? Arnold Palmer Invitational. You got all these players that aren't involved. Oh no, John Rahm, Dustin Johnson, Bryson DeChambeau. I didn't miss them. I enjoyed the day. I enjoyed the weekend all the same. You still have enough great players. There's so much parity in the sport.
Well, the ratings were down 30% in the final round. So
what?
The ratings for the Arnie were down 30% in the final round.
Well, you know what? Not at my household. I'll tell you that much. All right, Mike, we'll wrap with this. I noticed some criticism coming in when I voiced my opinion the other day on my show that it was perhaps a little hypocritical of Nick Saban to go on a Capitol Hill rant about NIL and how greedy players are when this guy's career earnings are $150 million. Is it not a little bit tone deaf for somebody who has made so much generational wealth off the sport to go, why do players want money now? It just seems like out of touch to me. And our text line did not agree with that opinion. So where do you
Of
fall
course
on that?
not, because a lot of old school college football fans hate NIL. They hate the transfer portal. They're against player empowerment. That's just how old school fans are. They don't want the players to have any power. They don't want the players to get paid. Mark Daniels brought up a good point when we were talking on the bridge the other day. He goes, yeah, you had this Capitol Hill roundtable with Nick Saban and ADs. He goes, where was the player on that roundtable? Where was the player who got $300,000 in NIL money saying, you know what? I use this money to pay my mother's bills, to help her get out of debt, and to help feed, my brothers and sisters. Where was that player? Okay, because I'd like to hear that story at the Capitol Hill table about how the players need this money to help support their families, because some of these college players, they do have families that need money.
Absolutely. People with loads of it tend to forget how important it is because they don't worry about it. When you're getting into college, whether you have a family to support or not, I was my family's fine. When I got to college, I was broke. I would have loved to have been paid. And for people that grew up in families of poverty, you'd want to be able to help them out.
Right.
And now you're able to do that. And last thing, Mike, am I really to believe that players before NIL became such a buzz phrase and legal, quote unquote, that Alabama players weren't getting paid? Am I really supposed to believe that?
They weren't,
like Mark Ingram's pockets weren't fat?
It's a lot cheaper to pay players under the table though than play them
over the
over the table.
That's
no
great.
Yeah.
The crossover is over.